The city is dressed in diamonds of frost, but behind the doors of a Fifth Avenue mansion, a colder storm brews. She was forced to marry a widowed tycoon, a stranger bound to the ghost of his first love. She arrived with nothing but her name, and a secret she buried deeper than her hopes. In this house of shadows, will duty silence the heart, or will desire find a way to bloom in frozen soil? Stay with us, because this is not just a story about marriage. It's a story about becoming. Tell us in the comments, where in the world are you listening from, and what do you love most about historical romances? New York City, late autumn of the year, 1899. The wind off the Hudson carried with it the scent of coal smoke and the sting of approaching winter. Carriages clattered down the avenues like the heartbeat of the restless city, and the copper leaves of Central Park spiraled past stone mansions with their drawn velvet curtains. From the carriage window, Josephine Radcliffe sat very still, her gloved hands folded over a lap she could no longer call her own. She had not spoken a word since the coach had crossed the boundary into Manhattan. There was no need. Words would not have changed the truth. She was no longer a Radcliffe of Albany, daughter of a ruined gentleman with debts buried deeper than his coffin. She was now Mrs. Nathaniel Worthington, wife, by arrangement, of a man she had seen only 3 times before their wedding. The Worthington mansion loomed as they turned onto Madison Avenue, its facade a solemn expanse of dark limestone, 5 stories of wealth and silence. Gas lamps flickered behind frosted windows. The carriage slowed, the horses restless. Josephine exhaled slowly, as though trying not to disturb the air around her, and stepped into her new life. The front doors opened before she reached them. A butler in a black tailcoat bowed without meeting her gaze. Inside, the house was as grand as it was cold. Gleaming marble floors, gilded sconces, ceilings painted with faded cherubs, their wings dulled by time. The air smelled faintly of rose oil and old wood. "Madam," the butler murmured, gesturing with a gloved hand. "Mr. Worthington awaits you in the drawing room." Josephine followed the sound of her own footsteps through the silent hall. Portraits of stern men and elegant women stared down at her from their frames, but none more fiercely than the woman above the hearth, Evelyn Worthington, the late mistress of the house. Her painted gaze followed Josephine as she entered the room where her new husband stood waiting. Nathaniel Worthington was a man built like the vessels he commanded, broad, dark, unmoving. He wore a black 3-piece suit and a high-collared shirt, starched within an inch of cruelty. His beard was neatly trimmed, his temples touched with gray. His hands were clasped behind his back and he did not smile. "You are punctual," he said. "Yes," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. He studied her for a moment, and she felt it. An inspection, not admiration. She was not here to be adored. She was here to be endured. "I trust your journey was comfortable." "As comfortable as could be expected," she answered. He nodded once, then walked toward a small table by the window. Upon it sat a velvet box. With silent precision he opened it and removed a gold ring, simple, unadorned, and heavy. "This belonged to Evelyn," he said, not offering an apology. "It is only fitting that you wear it now." Josephine extended her hand. The ring slid over her finger without resistance, and yet it felt like a shackle. Her eyes flicked toward his, but he did not meet her gaze. "I have had the staff prepare your rooms. You may redecorate if you wish, though I imagine you will not wish to disturb too much." "Thank you," she said quietly. A silence followed, long enough to become awkward, yet not long enough to escape. Then Nathaniel added without turning, "You are not expected to share my bed." Her heart stilled. "This is a house in mourning, Mrs. Worthington. It will remain so. I do not ask for affection. I ask only for appearances, and that my children come to no harm by your hand." "I understand," she murmured, her lips numb. "You may retire," he said, still without facing her. "We will dine at 7, should you care to join." With a curtsy so small it barely registered, Josephine turned and walked out. She did not cry. The grand staircase curved like a swan's neck, leading her upward into shadows and damask wallpaper. Her suite was at the far end of the second floor, 3 rooms with tall windows, thick rugs, and furniture polished to a mirror's shine. A fire had been lit, but the warmth did not reach her. The lady's maid, a thin woman with downcast eyes, helped her remove her cloak and gloves in silence. "Will that be all, madam?" "Yes," Josephine said. "Thank you." She stood alone before the mirror. Her reflection stared back, pale and composed. The bodice of her traveling dress, a fine navy wool with covered buttons, fit her too tightly now. Her chest rose and fell in shallow breaths. Slowly, she removed the ring from her finger and placed it on the vanity. Then she sat back straight, hands folded in her lap, and listened to the distant sounds of the city she did not know. In the quiet, the house creaked like a living thing. Somewhere below, a child laughed or cried. She could not tell. Josephine closed her eyes. She had crossed a threshold, one from which she would never return. And though her body remained perfectly still, inside her, a war had begun. Not one of rebellion, but of endurance. And endurance, she knew, had always been the armor of women like her. Women who loved in silence. Women who walked alone through marble corridors. Women who wore the names of men who would never look them in the eye. She would not break, but neither would she disappear. Not tonight. Not ever. The morning light in New York was colder than the one Josephine had known in Albany. It streamed through the tall windows like a silent accusation, gilding the carved moldings and embroidered draperies with gold that did not warm. The fire in the hearth had burned low, and the embers glowed like secrets not yet confessed. She had not slept. The bed had been too wide, the pillows too soft, and the quiet too absolute. In that silence, her thoughts had risen like specters. She had married into a house of ghosts. When the maid arrived to help her dress, Josephine spoke gently, but received only stiff nods in reply. She wore a modest day dress of deep plum wool, with a high collar trimmed in ivory lace. The fabric was soft but heavy, and the sleeves, shaped like gentle bells, fell just past her wrists. Her chestnut hair had been pinned into a neat chignon, though one rebellious strand curled against her cheek. "Mr. Worthington requests your presence in the morning room," the maid said. Josephine followed the hall down a corridor where sunlight filtered through beveled glass. As she walked, she caught glimpses of grandeur, Persian rugs, tapestries, ormolu clocks resting beneath cloches of glass, but it was not beauty that surrounded her. It was legacy. Every corner of the house belonged to someone who was no longer there. When she stepped into the morning room, she found Nathaniel standing beside a large window that overlooked the garden, his silhouette framed by the cold blue light. At his side stood a young boy with pale blonde hair and a face almost too still for childhood. "Josephine," Nathaniel said formally, "this is Edward." The boy looked up at her with large grey-blue eyes, then dropped his gaze. He wore a sailor suit, white with navy trim, and his posture was rigid, his fingers curled into fists at his sides. Josephine offered a soft smile and lowered herself slightly to his level. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Edward." He said nothing. After a moment of silence, Nathaniel cleared his throat. "Edward, go to your tutor. Mrs. Worthington has much to do today." The boy nodded, turned, and slipped from the room without a word. Josephine remained still, her hands gently folded in front of her. "He's very quiet." "He wasn't always," Nathaniel said, looking out the window again. "His mother used to say he had the spirit of a fox and the soul of a violin." Josephine looked down. "Do you wish for me to speak with him?" Nathaniel's reply came without inflection. "Only if you choose to. You are not here to mother my children, only to ensure they are not left adrift." A beat of silence stretched between them. Then Nathaniel turned toward the door. "Lillian will join you for tea. Mrs. Hale will arrange it." He left without another word. Josephine did not follow. She wandered through the library afterward, running her fingers lightly along the spines of books, too pristine to have been loved. Her breath formed tiny clouds in the chill air of the room. The Worthington wealth was visible in every corner, but it did not comfort. It watched. At 4 o'clock sharp, the tea was brought to the small drawing room. The porcelain was fine, French Limoges, hand-painted with violets, and the silver tray gleamed like polished armor. Lillian Worthington arrived without knocking. At 15, she carried herself like a duchess, chin high, back straight, and her expression carved in cool marble. She wore a pale blue day dress with puff sleeves and a velvet sash. Her dark hair pinned up in an arrangement that looked both elegant and imposed. "So," Lillian said, standing rather than sitting, "you are the new Mrs. Worthington." Josephine gestured gently to the chair across from hers. "Would you join me for tea?" Lillian remained where she stood. "Do you imagine that you'll win me over with cakes and embroidery?" "No," Josephine replied calmly. "I don't imagine anything at all. I only hoped for your company." Lillian arched an eyebrow, amused. "How quaint. Do you know what they say about you? That you were bought like silk in a marketplace, that you married my father to save your own family." Josephine did not flinch. "People will say what they wish, and perhaps they are not entirely wrong. But what I gave up to be here is not something anyone has the right to measure." The young girl's eyes narrowed, as if trying to determine whether Josephine's gentleness was a weapon. "My mother was beloved," Lillian said coldly. "She was elegant. She knew how to speak French. She hosted dinners with people who mattered." "I'm not your mother," Josephine replied, her voice like warm wool. "And I will never try to be." There was a flicker, just a flicker of surprise in Lillian's expression, but she said nothing else. She turned and left as quickly as she had come. Mrs. Hale entered shortly afterward, collecting the untouched tea with quiet efficiency. She wore a somber wool gown and no expression at all. "Miss Lillian is still in mourning," the housekeeper said. "As is the house," Josephine replied softly. For the first time, Mrs. Hale looked at her fully. There was something in her gaze, not approval, not warmth, but recognition. A woman could see another woman's restraint. That night the house grew even more silent. Josephine sat at the small writing desk in her private room. A single lamp illuminated the crisp linen paper before her. She dipped her pen in ink and began to write. "Dearest mother, it is difficult to describe this place. It is not that the people are cruel. Rather, they are full of grief that has nowhere to go. I feel as though I have stepped into a life that never asked for me. The walls are heavy with memories, and I am a stranger here, not just to them, but to myself." Edward is silent, and Lillian is angry. I cannot blame either of them. Their lives were rewritten without their consent. I suppose in some ways so was mine. I do not yet know what role I am meant to play in this grand house, but I will try, for you, for Jonathan and Elise, for the dignity of our name, your loving daughter, Josephine. She sealed the letter, set it aside, and rose. The fire had dimmed, and the bed behind her looked like a sculpture of ivory and lace, beautiful, untouched and cold. She unfastened her dress slowly, folding it with care, as though she still lived in the modest Albany house where fabrics were never taken for granted. Clad in her cotton nightgown, she approached the window. Outside, the gas lamps flickered in the fog, their halos glowing like distant stars. A single carriage passed, wheels hissing against the wet street. She pressed her fingers to the glass. In that moment, she felt the weight of everything she had left behind, and yet, even through the ache, she understood one thing clearly. If this house was to remain a mausoleum, she would not be the ghost within it. Not while she had breath. Not while her heart still beat. She turned from the window and extinguished the lamp, and in the dark, she did not cry. She simply listened to the house breathe around her. The gaslight outside the Worthington mansion flickered as dusk settled over New York, casting soft golden pools upon the pavement and carriages below. The city, ever restless, whispered and roared in turns, its elegance veiling 1,000 ambitions behind velvet curtains and feathered fans. Inside, the household stirred with quiet urgency. A maid moved briskly down the corridor with a velvet box in her arms. Another hurried past the drawing room, carrying freshly pressed gloves and a vial of rose-scented perfume. The Worthington name would be seen at Delmonico's tonight, and appearances, Josephine had been warned, must be upheld. In her chamber, Josephine sat perfectly still before the mirror. Her maid, carefully adjusting the fall of her hair, worked in silence, pinning each coil with methodical precision. The gown had been laid out earlier that afternoon, a deep forest green satin with a sweeping train and tiny jet buttons trailing the back like black pearls. The bodice, delicately embroidered with bronze thread, fit her like a second skin, modest by society's standards, yet striking in its simplicity. Her mother's garnet earrings hung gently from her ears, the only jewelry she dared to wear that had not belonged to Evelyn Worthington. The ring, Evelyn's ring, now sat heavily on her finger, a daily reminder that she bore another woman's name, another woman's legacy. When Josephine descended the stairs, the butler gave a slight nod of acknowledgement. The parlor doors opened, and Nathaniel turned to see her. For a moment he said nothing. She had grown accustomed to his silences, but this one was different. His eyes, cool and grey like the Hudson on a winter morning, lingered longer than usual. He wore a black tailcoat and crisp white waistcoat, his cravat neatly tied with understated elegance. He looked every inch the gentleman tycoon he was reputed to be. "You look appropriate," he said finally. A pause. "Thank you," she replied. The carriage ride to Delmonico's passed in strained quiet. Josephine kept her gaze on the city streets beyond the frosted window, watching the blur of hansoms, gas lamps, and well-dressed pedestrians pass like a silent theatre. When they arrived, the doorman bowed low, the footman opened the carriage, and the crowd parted slightly to accommodate the Worthington name. But as they entered the grand hall, a murmur rippled through the guests. A flutter of glances, a shift of fans, a sharp smile here, a lowered voice there. Josephine had expected curiosity. What she had not expected was scorn. "Who is she?" someone whispered. "The upstate girl," another replied. "From Albany, wasn't it? She came with nothing, married into everything. She was never introduced at court, did you know? Not even at the Marbleton Assembly. Poor thing." Josephine kept her chin high. She moved through the room with measured grace, her hand resting lightly on Nathaniel's arm. But the feeling was unmistakable. She was not one of them. Camilla Thorne was the first to greet them. She was the kind of woman whose beauty was sharpened by cruelty, a delicate blade of porcelain skin, golden hair coiled like a crown, and eyes the color of dry gin. Her smile was precise, her voice syrupy and false. "Nathaniel," she purred, offering her gloved hand. "You do bring such surprises." He bowed slightly. "Miss Thorne. And this," she continued, turning to Josephine with the exaggerated politeness of a stage actress, "must be your bride." Mrs. Worthington," Josephine said, her tone smooth as glass. Camilla's eyes flickered. "How elegant! I had not seen your name in the printed guest list, but I'm sure it was merely an oversight." Her smile never reached her eyes. Josephine forced a serene nod, though something in her chest had begun to tremble. They continued through the crowd. Josephine smiled when addressed, bowed her head politely, exchanged pleasantries. But the conversations were thin, the glances sharper. At the buffet table, two women stepped aside as she approached. One coughed lightly behind her fan. She curtsied as though she were taught by housemaids. "She wears green. Green for an evening affair? She's trying to be Evelyn. Poor thing, she hasn't the shoulders for it." Josephine could feel the edges of her composure begin to fray. Nathaniel remained at her side, speaking only when necessary, his jaw tight. He did not look at her, but neither did he leave her. Then it happened. As the orchestra began a Strauss waltz, names were announced for the formal presentation. One by one, couples were introduced by the master of ceremonies, titles and lineages, old money and newer fortunes wrapped in practiced elegance. Josephine waited. and waited. Her name was not called. She turned to the stage where the names were being read. The list in the footman's hand ended without her. Camilla Thorne's smile deepened across the ballroom. Several heads turned. A few shoulders tilted in satisfaction. Josephine felt the heat rise to her cheeks, and for a moment she forgot how to breathe. Nathaniel, finally noticing, turned toward the dais. His eyes narrowed. He spoke something under his breath, too low for her to hear, and then, to her astonishment, he stepped forward. Without a word, he extended his hand. Josephine looked at him, stunned. "Dance with me," he said quietly. She placed her hand in his. The orchestra swelled. He led her into the waltz. At first, their movements were rigid, two figures executing the form without feeling. But as they moved, something shifted. His hand steadied her back. Her breath began to slow. Their eyes met. The room faded. No one spoke, but the silence around them was deafening. It was not love, it was not forgiveness, but it was acknowledgement. And in that moment, for the first time, Josephine Worthington was seen. Later that night, long after the carriages had departed and the great chandeliers of Delmonico's had dimmed, Josephine returned to the mansion alone. Nathaniel had remained behind, attending to a last matter. She walked through the silent corridors, her train trailing behind her like a memory. In her room, she removed the earrings, the gloves, the combs from her hair. She let the gown fall in silence. Then she sank into the chair by the hearth and let the tears come. She wept not for humiliation, but for the ache of never being enough, for the weight of expectations that had never been her own, for a name she wore like borrowed lace. A soft knock at the door startled her. She rose quickly, wiping her face. Mrs. Hale stood on the threshold, holding a steaming cup of tea. "You've had a long evening, madam," the housekeeper said gently. Josephine nodded, unable to speak. Mrs. Hale placed the cup on the vanity. Her eyes, for the first time, softened. "Green suits you," she murmured, and then she left. Josephine stood alone, cradling the warmth of the tea between her palms. She drank slowly, not for the taste, but for the calm it brought. And when she climbed into bed, she did not cry again. She slept, not soundly, but she slept. The days in the Worthington mansion began to stretch, not unlike the corridors themselves, long, shadowed, and lined with locked doors. In every room, time hung like dust in the air, settling on memories that refused to fade. Though the city outside surged with clanging trolleys and modern ambition, inside the house, grief ruled like an invisible monarch. Josephine had learned to move quietly through it. She rose early, long before the bells chimed for breakfast, when the staff still whispered in the kitchen and the city's roar was muffled by frost. She wandered without destination, half in search of peace, half in search of herself. It was during one such morning, beneath a pale sky and a curtain of misted air, that she found the south garden. A narrow passage beyond the music room led to a door nearly obscured by a faded velvet curtain. The key had been left in the lock, untouched by use, but not by time. It resisted at first, groaning against her hand. Then it yielded, slowly, and the door creaked open onto a forgotten world. Beyond it lay a stone path, cracked and crooked, weaving through beds of ivy-choked hedges and skeletal rose bushes. The wrought-iron trellis above was half swallowed by climbing vines, brittle with the season's touch. And there in the center stood a circular bench of white marble, flaked by moss, encircling the remains of what had once been a fountain. The air smelled of damp earth and rust. It was quiet, not the kind of silence that oppressed, but the kind that listened. She stepped into it carefully, as though crossing a threshold into someone else's memory. Later that day, after tea and before supper, Josephine returned with gloves, shears, and a trowel borrowed from the shed. She said nothing to the staff, nor to Nathaniel. The garden, like her solitude, did not need permission. She began with the brambles, slicing through thorny vines with patient precision. Then came the dead leaves, the tangled weeds, the layers of decay left to settle in the absence of care. Her skirts grew damp at the hem, her fingers ached, and the late autumn wind nipped at her cheeks. But she worked until the light began to fade. It was only when she rose to stretch her back that she noticed him. Edward stood a few feet away, arms tucked behind his back, his coat buttoned all the way to his chin. His grey-blue eyes were watchful, not fearful, though he said nothing. Josephine wiped her gloves and gave him a small nod. "This garden used to be beautiful. Do you remember it?" He hesitated, then gave the faintest shrug. "I'd like to plant winter jasmine here," she continued softly, gesturing to the broken bed of soil near the bench. "It blooms in the cold, bright yellow like a candle in snow." Edward looked down at his shoes. Then, unexpectedly, he stepped forward and knelt beside her. He picked up a trowel she had set aside and began to dig. They worked side by side, wordlessly, the boy's small hands surprisingly steady. When dusk began to fall and the cold crept deeper into the earth, Josephine paused. "Thank you, Edward." He looked up. "She used to sit on the bench with me," he whispered, his voice thin as thread. Josephine's heart twisted. "I don't want to forget her," he added almost apologetically. "You won't," she replied. "No one ever really forgets someone they love. We just learn to carry them differently." He nodded once, then stood and walked away without another word. That night, Josephine ate dinner alone in the small dining room adjacent to the kitchen. Nathaniel was absent, as he often was. The room was quiet, except for the soft clatter of silverware and the occasional crackle of fire. She said nothing to the staff. She had grown used to the absence of conversation, but the memory of Edward's voice stayed with her long after the dishes had been cleared. The next morning she returned to the garden. The wind had picked up, scattering dried leaves across the path. She pushed them aside, swept the stones, pruned another hedge. The physical effort warmed her blood, awakened her purpose. She had just begun to rake around the base of the old bench when a voice shattered the stillness. "What do you think you're doing?" Josephine turned, startled. Lillian stood at the edge of the path, her cheeks flushed with fury, her gloved hands clenched at her sides. She wore a plum walking coat and a hat too elegant for the garden, but her anger made her seem older, sharper. "This was my mother's," Lillian snapped. "Her garden, her sanctuary. You have no right at all to touch it." Josephine straightened slowly, laying the rake down with care. "I'm not trying to erase her," she said quietly. "I'm only trying to bring it back to life." "Why?" Lillian's voice cracked. "So you can pretend to be her?" "No." "Then what is this?" she hissed, stepping forward. "You wear her ring, you sit in her house, you walk through her halls, and now you're planting your flowers over her memories." Josephine's throat tightened. The cold air stung her lungs. "I know I will never be her," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want to be. But this place has been left to die. I only wish to offer it a little warmth." Lillian's jaw trembled. For a moment her eyes shone, not just with rage, but with pain. "She used to sit there," she said, pointing to the bench, her voice growing smaller. "Every afternoon, she would hum while she read. She wore a green shawl that smelled like lavender and lemon. And She broke off. Josephine stepped back. "I will stop, if that's what you want." Lillian said nothing. She turned sharply and left, her boots crunching over the gravel. Josephine remained in the garden long after. The rake lay forgotten. Her breath formed pale clouds in the late afternoon air, and the jasmine bulbs remained untouched. That evening, as she ascended the stairs to her suite, the house seemed heavier than usual. Each step creaked underfoot. The sconces cast elongated shadows against the wallpaper. At her door, she stopped. Folded neatly on the handle was a grey wool shawl. Not new, but clean, edges slightly worn. No note, no explanation. Josephine touched the fabric gently, then pressed it to her cheek. It carried no scent of lavender or lemon, but it was warm. Mrs. Hale had passed by silently, her footsteps long gone. In that wordless offering, something had shifted. Not much, but enough. Josephine entered her room, draped the shawl over her shoulders, and lit the oil lamp on the vanity. The garden might still be wounded, the children still wary, Nathaniel still locked within himself, but the silence was beginning to crack. And through it, something tender had begun to bloom. Snow had begun to fall in New York, the kind that danced in the glow of gaslight and hushed the clamor of the streets like lace descending over the city. From the tall windows of the Worthington mansion, Josephine watched the flakes swirl gently over Madison Avenue, clinging to iron railings and velvet awnings. She held a pair of gloves in her hand, but made no move to put them on. The hour was late, and the night would be long. Downstairs, the carriage waited to take them to Delmonico's, where society would gather in glittering force. Old families in pearls and brocade, the new money in diamonds and silk, all cloaked in the same language of reputation. It would be Josephine's second major appearance since her marriage, and though her posture remained composed, something inside her fluttered like a bird startled from its nest. Her gown, chosen by the housemaid with Mrs. Hale's quiet oversight, was of soft champagne satin, embroidered along the neckline with tiny gold threads. It shimmered beneath the chandelier's glow, the corseted bodice emphasizing her slender frame, the skirt sweeping like liquid across the floor. Her hair had been gathered in an elegant twist at the nape of her neck, adorned with a single pearl comb. Modest, tasteful, and undeniably lovely. Nathaniel had not commented when he saw her. He had only offered his arm, with the formality of a gentleman escorting an acquaintance, not a wife. The carriage ride passed in near silence, broken only by the muffled wheels and the distant chimes of church bells counting the hour. Josephine kept her gaze fixed on the frost that bloomed against the window pane. Delmonico's stood ablaze with light, its columns wrapped in evergreen garlands, the entrance lined with liveried footmen. Inside, the ballroom shimmered with 1,000 reflections. Glass chandeliers, silver candelabras, gilded mirrors, all designed to multiply every gesture, every expression, every whispered word. Josephine stepped into the room and felt the eyes, some curious, some cold. She held her head high, repeating the advice her mother once gave her in Albany, long before marriage had been discussed. Walk like you're not waiting for permission to be seen. But the glances came sharp and swift, like needles sewn into silk. Nathaniel left her briefly to speak with a business associate. Josephine wandered toward the edge of the ballroom, taking in the scene. Ladies in scarlet and ivory, men with their hair slicked back and gloves folded beneath their arms, waiters gliding with silver trays like shadows dressed in white. And then, through the crowd, came the unmistakable sound of Camilla Thorne's voice. "Forgive me," she said to her circle, her voice lilting with amusement, "but I hadn't realized that Delmonico's had relaxed its standards." Laughter followed, tight and clipped. "Oh yes, it's all the rage now, marrying one's way into the guest list. Quite fashionable among the unfortunate." Another laugh, sharper this time. Josephine did not move. Her spine remained straight, her hands calmly folded over her satin fan. But her cheeks flushed, not from embarrassment, but from the familiar sting of powerlessness. Camilla approached slowly, like a cat who knew the bird could not fly. She wore crimson velvet, cut scandalously low, and her smile was all teeth. "My dear Mrs. Worthington," she said with mock sincerity, "what a charming surprise. We feared you'd been forgotten by the announcers' list again." Josephine opened her mouth, but the words she wished to say, sharp, clever, cutting, refused to rise. Instead, it was Nathaniel who appeared beside her, so silently and suddenly that Camilla's smile faltered. He looked at Josephine first, then at Camilla. "There is nothing surprising about my wife's presence," he said. "She is a Worthington." Camilla's lips twitched, but she offered a stiff curtsy. "Of course. How gracious of you both to join us." Without another word, Nathaniel turned to Josephine and extended his hand. "Shall we dance?" She hesitated for half a breath, then placed her gloved hand in his. The orchestra struck the first notes of a Strauss waltz. They stepped onto the polished floor, gliding beneath the golden chandeliers. The room faded at the edges, and the watching eyes blurred into a distant haze. His hand rested at the small of her back, firm, unfamiliar, and startlingly warm. Josephine followed his lead, uncertain but steady. At first, the steps felt mechanical, as if she were executing a rehearsed performance. But as the music swelled, something shifted. He looked at her, truly looked. She lifted her eyes and met his. There was no smile, no apology, but there was presence. And in that moment, Josephine felt herself seen in a way she had not been since she'd entered this house of ghosts. The dance continued, and they moved together, not with grace, but with tension, a conversation spoken through fingertips and breath. When it ended, there was silence, not from the orchestra, but from the room. And then applause, polite, distant, but real. Nathaniel released her hand. "You handled that with dignity." "Handled what?" "The lion's den." She tilted her head. "You threw me to it." His mouth quirked, almost a smile. Almost. But then he bowed his head slightly and walked away. He did not return. The rest of the evening blurred. She spoke with two elderly dowagers who commented kindly on her gown, exchanged shallow greetings with men who had known Nathaniel for decades. Camilla did not approach her again. When the carriage pulled up to the Worthington mansion, the sky was heavy with snow, and the gas lamps flickered like dying stars. Josephine climbed the steps alone. Nathaniel had chosen to remain behind for business. Upstairs, in her chamber, the silence was immense. The fire had not been lit. She removed her gloves slowly, then the pearl comb from her hair. She caught sight of herself in the mirror, cheeks flushed, lips parted, eyes wide with something she could not name. She stood for a long moment, listening to the stillness. Then she moved to the vanity, opened the small drawer, and took out the brush. As she untangled her hair, she thought not of Camilla, nor of the whispers, nor of the way the room had watched her. She thought only of Nathaniel's hand at her back, of the weight of it, of the moment his eyes had met hers and had not looked away. In his study, Nathaniel poured himself a glass of brandy. He stood by the hearth, the fire casting shadows against the walls lined with books and portraits. There, in the far corner of the desk, was a small drawer, locked. He reached for the key, hesitated, then closed his hand and turned away. The drawer remained locked, the letter inside unread, but the seal, already once cracked, had begun to loosen. The frost had deepened across the city, wrapping rooftops in brittle silver and etching ice onto the iron railings of Madison Avenue. Inside the Worthington mansion, the air felt heavier than ever, as though the very walls had begun to listen. Whispers moved quietly from room to room. Footsteps echoed with urgency. Eyes darted, hands trembled. At first, it was only a cough, a quiet, dry sound heard from behind a door on the second floor. Then came the shiver, the crimson flush on a pale face, the restless murmuring in sleep. Edward, the youngest soul in the house, had fallen ill, and within hours the word scarlet fever spread like fire through the servants' quarters and corridors. Panic did not scream in this household, it whispered. It moved beneath the surface like a current, steady and swift. The nursemaid locked herself in her room in fear. The physician arrived just after dusk, his coat dusted with snow, his eyes grave. Josephine stood in the hall as the doctor emerged from Edward's chamber. His brow glistened, his gloves removed. "There's nothing to be done but to wait," he said. "Keep him cool, watch the rash. If it reaches his chest..." He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. Nathaniel stood a few paces away, unmoving, his expression unreadable, carved in stone. "I will stay with him," Josephine said. "No," Nathaniel replied. "It's not your burden." She met his gaze with quiet strength. "It's not a burden. It's my place." The physician hesitated. "If you've never had it, you risk exposure." Josephine nodded. Then I will take the risk. She stepped into the sick room, closing the door behind her. The chamber was dim, warmed only by the low fire in the hearth. The heavy curtains had been drawn to block the winter chill. Edward lay motionless on the bed, his skin nearly translucent, a high flush spreading across his cheeks and throat. His fair hair clung damply to his forehead, and his small hands twisted weakly at the sheets. Josephine knelt beside the bed and touched his brow. He moaned softly. His body burned. A basin was brought. Linens, cool cloths, tea that went untouched. She sat with him through the night, whispering lullabies she remembered from her childhood, stories she had once read aloud to her younger brother. Her fingers trembled, but her voice did not. She wiped his forehead, coaxed sips of water between his lips, and hummed softly through every fevered breath. When the morning came, she did not rise. By the second night, her own eyes were rimmed with red, her gown wrinkled from hours of kneeling. She had not eaten, she had not slept. The world beyond that chamber might as well have stopped. It was the third night when Lillian entered. She did not knock. She stepped into the room with shoulders squared and chin high, but her hands clenched the doorframe as though it were all that kept her from falling. "Why are you still here?" she demanded. Josephine turned toward her slowly. "He's still burning. His pulse is too quick. I'm watching it." Lillian's voice cracked. "He doesn't need you. You're not his mother." "No," Josephine said softly. "I'm not." "Then why?" "Because someone has to be here." Lillian's breath hitched. "You're pretending. You want to replace her. That's why you wear her ring, why you walk in her garden, why you sit in her house." Josephine rose, her movements slow but steady. "I am not pretending, Lillian. I did not come here to take your mother's place. I could never fill that space. I wouldn't try, but Edward is a child, and he is suffering, and I won't leave him." Lillian's eyes shimmered with unspilled tears. She never would have let him suffer alone. "Nor will I." A silence settled between them. Then Lillian stepped forward, tentative, uncertain, and sat at the edge of the bed. She reached for Edward's limp hand and held it in both of hers. "I used to sing to him," she whispered, "when he had nightmares." Josephine said nothing. She reached for a cloth and pressed it gently to Edward's temple. That night they stayed together. Josephine dozed lightly in the armchair, a blanket draped over her shoulders. Lillian watched the fire, murmuring soft words to her brother when he stirred. The fever had not broken, but the rhythm of the room had changed. In the early hours of the morning, when the house still lay in darkness, Edward stirred. His breathing shifted, less ragged, more steady. His hand tightened faintly around Lillian's fingers. Josephine woke at the movement, leaned forward, and placed a hand against his forehead. Cool. A breath escaped her lips, so soft it was barely sound. He was cooler, not fully well, not yet. But the fever was turning. When the first light of dawn crept into the sky, the door opened quietly. Nathaniel stood at the threshold. He took one step in, then stopped. Josephine, still seated at Edward's bedside, did not move. Her eyes were heavy, her hair had come loose from its pins, and her gown bore the creases of 3 sleepless nights. She did not look elegant. She looked real. For a long moment, Nathaniel said nothing. Then he removed his coat, dark wool, lined in satin, and stepped forward. With careful hands, he laid it gently across Josephine's shoulders. She did not speak. She simply let it rest there, the weight of it unfamiliar and comforting. Nathaniel looked down at his son, then at Lillian, then at Josephine once more. "Thank you," he said quietly, and then he left. Moments later, Mrs. Hale entered with a basin of fresh, warm water. She had always sent maids to perform such tasks, but this time she came herself. She placed the basin on the table, then folded a clean towel with care. Her eyes met Josephine's briefly. No words were exchanged. None were needed. The basin steamed in the soft light. The fire crackled, and outside the snow continued to fall. The snow had settled thick and quiet over New York, silencing even the city's eternal hum. Rooftops had turned to porcelain, the carriages moved slower, their wheels muffled by slush, and the air held the stillness of something unspoken. Inside the Worthington mansion, the fire crackled in the drawing room, casting soft flickers of amber across the rug, but Josephine could not feel its warmth. The letter lay open in her lap. The paper was creased from the trembling of her hands, the handwriting delicate and slanted, each word heavier than the ink that formed it. "Dearest Josephine, your brother Jonathan writes these words for me, as my hands no longer hold a pen steady. The cold this winter has worsened my breath and brought back the aching in my bones. I do not write to alarm you, my beloved daughter, only to ask for your prayers. The doctor says rest will help, but I feel tired in a way that rest cannot cure. Do not worry for us. Elise helps with the sewing now, and Jonathan takes in enough from tutoring that we manage. You needn't return unless... No, I will not write unless." The letter stopped there. No signature, just space. Josephine rose from the chair too quickly, the letter falling to the floor. She did not notice. Her heart thudded in her chest like the sound of boots on marble, and her breath came short, as if the words had stolen the air from her lungs. She left the drawing room and walked swiftly through the corridor, past the library and the grand stairs, until she reached the study. She paused only briefly at the door before pushing it open. Nathaniel looked up from his desk. His eyes, steady and unreadable, met hers with mild surprise. "There's news from Albany," she said, breathless. "It's my mother. She's unwell, seriously unwell. I must go to her." He set down his pen. "You've only just returned to routine. The household has barely settled. The children will be fine," she interrupted. "Edward is recovering well. Lillian can look after him. Mrs. Hale, this is not simply about the children." His voice was low, measured. "We cannot afford the scandal of a wife who disappears to her childhood home. Not now. Not after the progress that's been made." Josephine stepped closer. "What progress, Nathaniel? A few glances at Delmonico's? A dance that meant nothing? Do you think the city cares more about appearances than I do for my own mother's life?" He stood now, and the space between them was suddenly too small. "You are a Worthington," he said, not harshly, but with the weight of stone. "You have duties here." She laughed, but there was no joy in the sound. "Duties? Do not speak to me of duties. I have honored every one of them. I have stood beside you in silence, dressed as you asked, smiled as you wished. I have earned nothing in this house but half-glances and cold corridors." He remained still. "You treat me like a presence," she continued, voice trembling. "Not a person. I do not live here. I haunt it. I've become a ghost in your wife's home, and now you would keep me from my mother's deathbed because of what society may think?" His expression shifted, barely. A muscle twitched in his jaw. "You assume she is dying?" "No," she said softly now. "I fear she is." They stood in silence. Outside the windows, the snow continued to fall. Then Nathaniel spoke, quiet and clipped. "You may go to your rooms now." She blinked. "Is that your answer?" "It is not a decision I will make tonight." She turned and left without another word. In her chamber, she undressed in silence. The maid had already drawn the curtains and set the fire, but Josephine waved her away before she could assist further. She needed no help to shed her satin gown, nor to sit at the vanity and unpin her hair with fingers that trembled too much to succeed on the first try. That night, she did not sleep. She sat near the hearth, wrapped in the wool shawl Mrs. Hale had given her, her hands clasped tightly over her knees. In the study below, Nathaniel stood alone. He poured no brandy. He read no papers. He stared at the drawer. It had remained untouched for 3 years, locked, preserved. He opened it slowly. The key turned without resistance, as though it had waited too long for the moment. Inside was the letter. The parchment had yellowed slightly, but her handwriting, Evelyn's, remained clear, delicate, and poised. He read it by firelight. The words were not extraordinary. They were not poetic, but they were hers, and in them she had written of the children, of the house, of the fear she had carried in her final weeks that she would leave too much undone. "I do not ask you to love again," she had written, "but I ask you, Nathaniel, not to close your heart so tightly that nothing can enter, not even light." When the morning came, the snow had softened. Josephine was still at the hearth, her eyes open, though heavy with exhaustion. She heard the knock but did not rise. Mrs. Hale entered with quiet authority. In her hands was a breakfast tray, toast, tea, and a folded note sealed with Nathaniel's signet. Josephine took it without a word. The note read simply, "The carriage will be ready by 10. A nurse will accompany you. You will not travel alone." Nah. She folded the note, pressed it to her lips, and closed her eyes. By mid-morning, the coach waited outside, wheels brushed of snow, horses freshly groomed. The nurse, a capable woman in grey wool, stood ready beside the steps. Mrs. Hale offered a travelling cloak lined with fur. Lillian appeared at the door, holding Edward's hand. He waved shyly. Nathaniel stood beneath the portico, his gloves in one hand, his coat fastened tight against the cold. Josephine descended the steps with grace. She paused before him. "Thank you," she said. He nodded once. "Your family matters, as do you." Their eyes held for a moment. No more was said. She stepped into the carriage. As it pulled away, Josephine looked back only once, not at the house, at him. And in that gaze there was no bitterness, only something quiet and new. Respect. The train groaned into the Albany station beneath a grey sky thick with the weight of snow. The platform was nearly deserted, save for the occasional bundled figure hurrying between cars. Josephine stepped down from the compartment, wrapped in her fur-lined cloak, the air sharp against her cheeks. The cold in Albany was harsher than in New York, less ornamental, more bone-deep. It was the cold she had known all her life. A hired sleigh waited to take her through the familiar streets of her childhood, but the city had changed. Or perhaps she had. Houses she once dreamed of now looked small. Storefronts that once held enchantment now seemed plain. The streets were lined with memory, but they no longer belonged to her. The cottage was just as she remembered, modest, weather-worn and dusted with snow. The front gate still creaked, the roof still sloped unevenly. She stepped through the front door into the warmth of the fire, the scent of rosemary and wood smoke clinging to the air. Her brother Jonathan, taller now, older somehow, greeted her with a weary smile. His eyes bore the same solemnity their father once wore after long days at the law office. "She's resting," he whispered, leading her through the hall. "She's been waiting for you." In the small bedroom at the back of the house, her mother lay beneath a crocheted blanket that Josephine had stitched when she was 15. The once sturdy woman looked impossibly small now, her chest rising in fragile rhythm, her eyes closed. Josephine knelt beside the bed, took her mother's hand in both of hers, and pressed it to her cheek. "Mother," she whispered. The eyelids fluttered open. "My Josephine," she murmured, her voice like the wind through dry leaves. "You came. I would never stay away." A faint smile appeared. "You look expensive." Josephine laughed softly, tears rising despite herself. They did not speak much that first night. Her mother drifted in and out of sleep, her voice little more than a whisper. But when Josephine sat by the window, watching snow gather on the sill, her mother reached out and tugged at her sleeve with what little strength remained. "I feared you'd lose yourself there," she said. "Among the marble and mirrors." Josephine turned. "I nearly did, but you didn't." Her mother's smile held pride and something deeper, peace. "You were always stronger than you believed." In the days that followed, Josephine became nurse and daughter, caretaker and confidant. She brought broth to her mother's lips, bathed her with lavender-scented cloths, and read aloud from the Book of Psalms she had once memorized by heart. Her sister Elise, now 17, was quiet but capable, eyes tired from worry. She looked at Josephine with a mixture of awe and distance. The letters Josephine had written had not prepared Elise for the woman who returned. "You're different," Elise said one morning, standing at the kitchen table with flour-dusted hands. "You don't talk the same." Josephine smiled. "I don't feel the same." Her mother's health stabilized after 3 days, the worst having passed before Josephine's arrival. The doctor, an old friend of the family, advised rest and warmer weather. "She's endured much," he said, "but she endures still, just like you." When Josephine left on the 6th morning, her mother's hands were steadier, her gaze clearer. She kissed Josephine's cheek with a soft murmur of thanks. "You sacrificed more than they'll ever know," she whispered, "but you made the right choice." He needed someone who still believes in gentleness. The sleigh that took her back to the train station moved slowly through the snow. As Albany faded behind her, Josephine felt no regret, only gravity. She had come full circle, but the circle no longer closed. She was not the same woman who had left this place. She was not the same woman who had married out of duty. She had become something else, someone else. When the train pulled into Grand Central Station, the sky above New York was pale blue, and the sun caught on the rooftops like brushed gold. The streets were still cloaked in snow, but the city pulsed beneath it, as if impatient for spring. The Worthington carriage was waiting, the family crest discreet on the door. The nurse who had accompanied her helped with her small trunk, and within minutes she was winding once more through the streets of Manhattan. As the mansion came into view, she noticed the wreath on the gate had been changed, white winter blossoms and dried garden herbs. Not store-bought, not formal, personal. When she stepped into the front hall, the butler greeted her with a bow and took her cloak. There was no announcement, no fuss, only warmth. Lillian appeared first, her dark hair swept up in a tidy arrangement, her dress a soft shade of mauve. She hesitated, then stepped forward and embraced Josephine. The hug was brief but real. I didn't know what scent you liked," she said quickly, "so I used rosemary and thyme from the garden. They're hanging in your room." Josephine felt her throat tighten. "It's perfect." Edward came bounding down the stairs, his cheeks flushed from the cold, eyes wide with light. "Joe!" he cried. She knelt just in time for him to throw his arms around her neck. "You're home." His voice was full of joy, the kind that children never fake. She held him close, blinking back the sudden sting in her eyes. "I missed you," he said. "I missed you too," she whispered. As she rose, Mrs. Hale appeared at the end of the corridor, holding a tray with 2 teacups. Her eyes met Josephine's, and for the first time there was something unmistakable in them, affection. "Would you like tea, madam?" Josephine nodded. "I would." The house had not changed. The wallpaper was still the same, the carpet still pristine. Evelyn's portrait still hung in the parlor, but the weight in the air had shifted. Upstairs in her room, the dried herbs hung neatly above the window. A small vase with garden sprigs sat on her vanity. Her shawl, freshly folded, waited on the foot of her bed. Everything was in place, but nothing was untouched. As the afternoon faded, she was told that Mr. Worthington was in the library. She walked there slowly, her footsteps soft against the rug. The doors were half open. The fire inside burned low. He stood by the window, gazing out over the snowy garden. He did not turn when she entered. "Your mother?" he asked. "Improving," she replied. "I'm glad." There was a pause. Then he turned. His face was unreadable, but not cold, not closed. "Welcome home," he said. 2 words, but this time they rang with meaning. They were not formality, not obligation. They were a recognition. She nodded slowly. "Thank you." He gestured toward the fire. "Would you sit with me?" She stepped forward, not to obey, but to accept. As she lowered herself into the chair beside him, the silence that settled between them was not awkward. It was a silence full of understanding, of things not yet said, but no longer denied. And for the first time, Josephine Worthington felt that she had returned not only to a house, but to her place within it. A pale sun filtered through the lace curtains that morning, casting a gauzy light across the Worthington mansion. The house was quiet, unusually so, as if it too had fallen into reflection. Josephine wandered its corridors with a sense of calm unease, her footsteps muffled by thick Persian rugs, her fingertips grazing the wainscoted walls. She had lived there for nearly a year, yet entire wings still felt like museums rather than home. It was Mrs. Hale who mentioned the parlor. "There is a room," she had said that morning almost absently, while directing a maid on how to press linen napkins for an upcoming dinner. The south parlor, past the conservatory. It was sealed the day Mrs. Worthington passed. No one has opened it since. The words had been quiet, but they hung in Josephine's ears with weight. Sealed, past, a space untouched by time and by grief. Curiosity, tempered by apprehension, stirred in her chest. That afternoon, while the house lay in a hush between lunch and the lighting of the evening lamps, Josephine made her way to the forgotten room. She had to push through a narrow door hidden behind an embroidered screen. A slight resistance met her hand, the weight of air undisturbed. The hinges groaned faintly as the door gave way. The parlor smelled of time, not of decay, but of stillness. The kind of silence that gathered in cathedrals or old theaters, as if emotion itself had been sealed inside. Dust danced in the golden light pouring through high windows. A velvet chaise rested beneath one of them, its deep wine-colored fabric faded with age. A vase stood on a side table, its flowers long gone but their brittle stems intact. And there, above the marble fireplace, hung the portrait. Evelyn Worthington. Painted in oils, she sat with regal posture and an air of gentle aloofness. Her gown was sky-blue satin, her dark auburn hair coiled into a perfect chignon. Her eyes, a clear grey, gazed directly forward, confident, beautiful, composed. Josephine felt something in her tighten. It was not jealousy, not exactly. Evelyn had died years ago, but there was something unbearable about being studied by a woman who had once ruled this house, this family, this man. Evelyn's beauty was unmarred by time, her memory still enshrined in every shadowed corner. And here Josephine stood, in a house that had once been Evelyn's stage, struggling each day not to disappear. She sat slowly on the edge of a settee and folded her hands in her lap. The silence pressed in. "I used to sit here for hours." The voice startled her. She turned. Lillian stood in the doorway, half silhouetted by the light behind her. Her eyes were not confrontational now, nor defensive, only reflective. "She'd read to me from the Bible," Lillian said, "or brush my hair." She never raised her voice, she didn't have to. Josephine rose gently. "I didn't mean to intrude. I didn't know anyone still came here." "No one does, not really." They stood side by side, looking up at the painting. "You're not her," Lillian said suddenly, voice quiet, almost reverent. "And I'm glad." Josephine turned her head slowly. Lillian's eyes did not meet hers, but they did not need to. The words settled between them like snow, soft and transforming. "Thank you," Josephine said. Lillian nodded once and turned to leave. Josephine remained, staring up at the portrait that for so long had loomed like a judgment. But now it seemed different. Not diminished, but no longer supreme. That evening, the air in the mansion was sharp with the scent of pine from the fresh garlands draped along the balustrades. The fire in Nathaniel's study burned low, casting long shadows against the book-lined walls. Josephine stood in the hallway outside for a long moment before knocking. "Come in," his voice said, as steady and clipped as always. She entered. Nathaniel was seated behind his desk, the sleeves of his black evening coat pushed slightly up, a glass of untouched brandy near his right hand. His gaze was distant, not fixed on any one thing. Only when she closed the door behind her did he look up. She did not speak at first. She walked to the fireplace and warmed her hands. "I found the parlor today," she said. His shoulders tensed. "The portrait. It's beautiful." "Yes," he said after a pause. "She was." The silence stretched again, thick but not hostile. "Nathaniel," she said, turning to him, Why did you marry me? He looked down at his hands. A long time passed before he answered. At first, he said, it was duty, practicality. The children needed someone, the house needed order, and I needed to fill the silence. He stood and moved closer to the fire. The glow revealed the fine lines at his temples, the curve of his mouth, the faint tremble in his jaw. But it stopped being duty, he continued. Somewhere between your silences and your laughter, between the way you speak to Edward and how you listen to Lillian, even when she doesn't deserve it, it changed. You changed me. Josephine felt her breath tighten. And now? She asked. He met her gaze fully. There was no hesitation. Now I am frightened by how much I feel. She stepped toward him. The distance between them was not far. Her voice was soft. You're not the only one who changed. I didn't know what to expect when I came here, but I never imagined I would care this deeply. His hand lifted, then paused, as if asking permission without words. She tilted her face toward his. The kiss was not urgent. It was not heated. It was reverent. He kissed her like a prayer. When they parted, she remained close, her forehead near his. I won't ever be Evelyn, she whispered. I would never ask you to be. Outside, the snow had begun to fall again, softly, silently. Inside the house, something shifted, not broken, not erased, but transformed. Later that night, as Josephine passed the corridor where the parlor stood, she paused. The door remained ajar. Light from the hallway spilled in just enough to illuminate the portrait above the fireplace. Evelyn looked out, as she always had, but Josephine no longer flinched beneath her gaze. She gave a quiet nod, a gesture of respect and of farewell. Then she turned away and walked toward her own room, her own life, her own future. Snow had fallen all morning in delicate flurries, blanketing Fifth Avenue in a soft hush that seemed to muffle even the clatter of carriages and the murmur of pedestrians. The Worthington mansion stood radiant against the silvered city, its windows aglow with candlelight, its tall doors open to the evening air as servants loaded trunks and wrapped cloaks for the journey ahead. Josephine stood at the top of the grand staircase, fastening the pearl buttons of her opera gloves. Her gown shimmered like frost, a rich shade of ivory silk embroidered with silver thread and delicate sprays of seed pearls along the neckline. Her hair was swept into a low chignon, with a single winter rose tucked behind her ear. She felt for the first time in her life not like someone merely occupying a role, but like a woman entirely her own. Below, Lillian appeared in a flurry of satin and tulle, her debutante gown a marvel of pale blue and white. She paused when she saw Josephine and offered a quick, rare smile. "You look beautiful," Josephine said softly. Lillian hesitated. "So do you." It was not a formal compliment, but a genuine one, and Josephine received it as such. The Metropolitan Club shimmered with light and laughter that night. Its great ballroom was hung with garlands of evergreen and silver, the chandelier prisms catching candlelight like stars. The city's most powerful families filled the floor in velvet and brocade, their jewels and polished shoes shining beneath the golden glow. Nathaniel arrived with Josephine on his arm. He wore a black tailcoat with a crisp white cravat, his silver cufflinks gleaming like snowfall. He said little as they entered, but the pressure of his hand on hers was grounding, reassuring, and for the first time, she did not shrink beneath the scrutiny of high society. She held her chin high, aware of every glance. Camilla Thorne was among the first to greet them, flanked by two women in diamonds that seemed too heavy for their necks. Her voice was honey-dipped and cruel. "Mrs. Worthington," she said, bowing just slightly. "You're quite radiant. I was surprised to see you on the list." Josephine smiled calmly. "I do hope the surprise was pleasant." Camilla's expression flickered, but before she could respond, Lillian stepped forward. "I asked Father to make sure you were invited," she said with deliberate brightness. "I thought it only fair that someone so devoted to the Worthington family witness the new century alongside us." Camilla blinked, momentarily thrown off balance. How thoughtful. Wasn't it? Lillian said, and looped her arm through Josephine's. The gesture was small, but the statement was vast. Josephine felt it ripple through the room, not only acceptance, but allegiance. Nathaniel appeared at her side then, his presence commanding. He held out his arm with easy formality. "Shall we?" he said. Josephine took it, her gloved fingers slipping over his. Together, they crossed the ballroom floor. They did not dance that night, but they did not need to. Their movements were a kind of waltz, subtle, graceful, aligned. When Nathaniel spoke, it was only to her. When Josephine smiled, it was with a confidence earned through fire. Shortly before midnight, they returned to the mansion. Edward, who had been excused from the late-night revelries, sat bundled in the library window seat with a book in his lap, and his eyelids drooping. Mrs. Hale stood nearby with a tray of hot cocoa. When Josephine entered, Edward's eyes lit up. "You came back," he murmured sleepily. "Of course I did," she said, lifting him gently into her arms. Upstairs, Lillian had left a sprig of rosemary on Josephine's pillow, a symbol of remembrance and hope. The scent filled the air as Josephine stepped onto the balcony where Nathaniel was already waiting, coat open to the cold, his gaze on the sky. The clock struck midnight. A bloom of golden light exploded above the rooftops, followed by a burst of red, then blue. The fireworks began in earnest, painting the New York sky in colors reflected in the glass towers and frozen avenues below. Josephine stood beside Nathaniel as Lillian joined them, still radiant in her gown. Edward clung to her shoulder, sleepy but awake enough to murmur, "Happy New Year." Mrs. Hale appeared silently behind them with cocoa for all. No one spoke. They did not need to. The warmth between them was not loud. It did not declare itself with grand speeches or fanfare. It was found in the touch of a hand, in the weight of a child's head on a shoulder, in the shimmer of a girl's gown, and in the glint of pride in a man's eye as he watched the woman beside him. Josephine glanced down and noticed a letter tucked inside the pocket of her wrap. It bore her sister's handwriting. She unfolded it by lamplight once back inside. Her mother's health, it said, was improving. Slowly, yes, but steadily. Her siblings sent love, and there were whispers of her father's good name being spoken of kindly once more. Josephine folded the letter against her chest and closed her eyes. When she had arrived in New York the year before, she had stepped into a house that mourned, that resisted change, that barely made room for breath. Now it stood filled with laughter, with children, with light. She had not replaced Evelyn. She had not needed to. She had become something else entirely. As the final fireworks lit the sky, Josephine turned to Nathaniel. He looked at her as though he had never really seen her until that moment. "To the new century," she said softly. "To our century," he replied. And hand in hand, with cocoa cooling on the tray behind them and the snow falling gently once more, the Worthingtons began the next chapter of their lives. Not just as survivors of sorrow, but as a family. And in that house on Fifth Avenue, once filled with ghosts, now lived something far more enduring: love. The Worthington mansion on Fifth Avenue had changed with the times. The gas lamps had been replaced with electric light, the once whispered idea of a telephone now firmly installed in the vestibule, and motorcars had begun to line the street where carriages once ruled. Yet some things had not changed. Inside, the air still carried the scent of lemon oil and dried rosemary. Josephine stood at the parlor window, one hand resting on the back of a velvet armchair, the other gently cradling the curve of her abdomen. Her third child was due in the spring. Outside, golden leaves danced along the wrought iron fence, the trees shedding their brilliance one gust at a time. Autumn had always made her ache, with memory, with gratitude, with that tender sort of sorrow that only comes when one has known the fragility of happiness. Behind her, the sound of a piano played softly. Edward, now nearly 18, sat at the instrument with an air of absent-minded grace, the melodies drifting through the house. He had grown into a young man of quiet strength, still introspective, still gentle, but no longer afraid to speak his mind. He was to begin university in Boston come winter, though he would miss the little ones terribly. Lillian had married in June. Her wedding portrait still rested above the fireplace, a vision in cream lace and pride. She had chosen a man not for his fortune, but for his kindness, and when she looked at Josephine that day, it was with eyes that shimmered with something deeper than love, understanding. She came often now, bringing fresh bouquets from her greenhouse and staying for long afternoons with her infant daughter, whom she had named Evelyn, not in reverence for the past, but in peace with it. Josephine turned at the sound of hurried footsteps and laughter. Little Henry, just 6, burst into the room with his curls askew and cheeks flushed from play. Behind him toddled Rose, still unsteady on her feet, but determined to keep pace with her brother. "Slow down, Henry," Josephine called out gently, but with the warmth of a mother who had long since stopped trying to bottle childhood. Henry skidded to a stop just short of the armchair, giggling as Rose bumped into his legs and clung to his coat. Nathaniel entered moments later, his overcoat draped over one arm and the faint scent of autumn clinging to him. His temples were more silver now, the lines around his eyes deeper, but there was a brightness to him that had not existed 8 years ago. He bent to lift Rose into his arms and kissed Josephine on the forehead in passing, so naturally, so easily, as though that had always been their way. "You missed quite the chase," he said with mock severity. "I was nearly trampled by a 6-year-old and his accomplice." Josephine smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You'll forgive them, I hope." "Eventually," he said. But his eyes softened when he looked at her. They always did. There had been trials. The world had not remained gentle. Josephine's mother had passed peacefully 3 winters prior. Her letters now tied with blue ribbon in a drawer Josephine visited on quiet days. Albany had changed, quieter, poorer, but her siblings wrote often, and one of her younger brothers now worked in Edward's old post at the firm. As for Camilla Thorne, her downfall had not come in fire or scandal, but in silence. The new century had little patience for women who clung to cruelty like a badge. She was last seen on the arm of a lesser noble in Paris, her name absent from any New York paper for years now. Mrs. Hale still ruled the household, though with a warmer hand. Her hair had gone fully white, but her posture remained as upright as ever. She took pride in helping the new nursemaid with the children, always insisting she had seen more births and bandaged more knees than any trained girl ever could. That evening, as dusk painted the parlor walls in amber tones, the Worthingtons gathered near the fireplace. Rose sat curled against Josephine's side, Henry on the floor beside his father, listening as Edward read aloud from a leather-bound volume of David Copperfield. Outside, the first stars blinked to life. It was a simple moment, but within its simplicity lived everything Josephine had once thought she would never possess: a family not forged by duty, but by choice. A husband who no longer lived in memory, but in the full presence of the now. Children who knew joy and stability, and who looked to her not as an interloper, but as the very center of their home. She had come to New York a stranger in silks, entering a house ruled by ghosts. Now, she was the heart of that house. Her love had not burned fast and bright. It had rooted itself slowly, deeply, through seasons of pain, of silence, of growth. And like the garden she once restored with trembling hands, it had blossomed into something breathtaking. As the fire crackled and laughter stirred once more in the room, Josephine leaned her head against Nathaniel's shoulder. The world outside had changed. But here, in this circle of warmth and flickering shadows, she found eternity. And she knew, with quiet certainty, that she had not only survived the century's turn, she had transformed it. Sometimes love arrives not as a thunderclap, but as a quiet knock at the door of a wounded heart. Josephine stepped into that mansion on Fifth Avenue, expecting only silence, shadows, and survival. What she found, through loss, rejection, grace, and the slow blooming of trust, was something greater, a place to belong, a family built not from perfect beginnings, but from courage, dignity, and resilience. Perhaps that is the true lesson of this story, that healing takes time, that love, when rooted in truth, outlives grief, that we are not defined by what we lose, but by how we choose to rise. And maybe, just maybe, there is always a way to turn a house of ghosts into a home full of laughter. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of your own strength, your own quiet victories, we would love to hear from you. Tell us what part touched your heart the most, or simply write the word home in the comments so we know you stayed with us until the very last line. It means the world to us. If you feel inspired to support the creators who bring these heartfelt stories to life, you can do so by sending a super thanks here on YouTube. Any amount you feel called to give helps us continue to tell stories like this, with the care and detail they deserve. And if you can't support us that way right now, we completely understand. Sharing this story with a friend, or someone who needs a little light in their day, is another beautiful way to help us grow. Don't forget to check the recommended stories in the cards at the end of this video. If you enjoyed A Century's Turn, you'll love what's waiting for you next. Thank you for opening your heart to this journey. We'll see you in the next chapter.